Welcome to ESVN, the Emma Sports Vigeland Network show. My name is Emma Vigeland, and here we are, ESVN episode 17 plus OT, because Monday, when we normally record, the day after Christmas, we have this week off at the Majority Report studios, although I'm here by myself, so you can see behind me, didn't have the ability to set up the green screen. I mean, I'm just flying solo today. Bradley did send in his picks, though, for OT, for our NFL locks against the spread, so don't worry. We have those, and the competition is just still hot, but Bradley won 3-0 again last week, so I'm not that happy about that part. But if you haven't subscribed yet, youtube.com/ESVN show, put on push notifications so you know when the show is going live, although this is a pre-recorded episode, to be clear. And if you are listening on a podcast platform, rate us 5 stars, subscribe to the downloads and such. Any show of support is appreciated for the show as we approach the playoffs, which will be very exciting. And so here's some housekeeping. I am on vacation for a week, January 3rd to the 10th. I thought we'd definitely have an ESVN on the 2nd. But then I realized, okay, we also have off that day because it's New Year's observed, which I didn't even know was a thing, but hey, I'm not complaining, but I'm not making Bradley come in when he has a day off, and then I'm on vacation for a week. So no episode next week, but we will do the same thing that we're doing now the week after that. A combined OT ESVN episode 18. This is our 17th long form episode plus the OTs. And then we will get into recaps of that week's games. And I think that'll be, us leading into the playoffs at that point. So I will be back for that, and that will be the schedule. So sorry for confusion, but we're basically, it's just us two running the show. So we're having to work with schedules. I'm very much looking forward to the playoffs. And we still will have 3 picks against the spread that we'll post on Twitter, on social media. Some way we will get it to you guys. Maybe I'll even do some sort of quick recording from my vacation, but no promises there. We will make sure to have our picks against the spread so our competition does not fall by the wayside. But yeah, so that's the housekeeping for you. There has been a lot of news in the NFL that I wanted to get to. And I should say, what a Christmas, right? What a holiday season, whatever you celebrate. But if you're like me and hey, you got a lot of family stuff going on. Sometimes that's a bit stressful. Sometimes tensions are high, Sometimes it's really fun, but then sometimes, of course, you can get into a little spat with your family. There's nothing like having the NFL on to distract me. And I basically told my family, like, hey, I'll see you all on Christmas Eve at night and throughout the day on Christmas. But I need my sit down viewing without any distractions of these 1 p.m. games. And I did some rapping during that time. So, plausible deniability, but it was a great time. It was such a festive way for me to spend my holiday. And I mean, I'll touch on some of the headlines out of those games. I got to address this off the bat, I think. My defense of Zach Wilson, not particularly aging well. Old takes exposed. And let me just say, to be fair to me, I remember, my old boss, Jank, used to say that. It makes me laugh. But I do want to give you guys all the context of how I felt about the situation. He had not played well this year. I just am a believer in giving your young quarterback as much leash as possible to grow, especially when his experience was limited coming out of BYU. And I just didn't feel like the Jets were handling the situation from a process perspective in the right way. I admitted that he was not playing well. I thought it was overstated a little bit. before this Jaguars game. And I thought Mike White's play was being overstated as being incredible and transcendent. I mean, the gap between them was not as wide as described in the press. However, he's done with the Jets. I don't know what's going to happen after that performance on Thursday Night Football against the Jaguars. And all I know is that he won't be there next year. I mean, I feel fairly certain about that. But that goes back to my criticism of the process, which is that the Jets, if they didn't think he was the guy, and it seems like they made an internal decision that that was the case, that he's not the guy, that we're going to move forward in a different direction, and maybe Derek Carr is that direction. We'll talk about that in a bit. But if they make that determination, that's fine. That's fine. You know, you don't want to double down on your mistake. A lot of GMs make that choice. Dave Gettleman. And if that's your assessment of his play, okay. Why tank your asset? That's the thing that I don't understand. I mean, dragging him essentially through the press and making this a whole spectacle, I don't understand it. There are plenty of times when a player gets injured when they're actually being benched. I mean, this happened twice, or resting or trying to reset, right? Like Russell Wilson had some leaks about his injuries that went to the media that were a little suspect, trying to explain away his poor play. They could have done that with Zach Wilson. They could have tried to at least support him a little bit more in the press so they could trade him for a better value in the offseason. They're not going to get anything for him at this point, even though he was everyone's consensus number 2 in the draft. I mean, I don't think you can hate on this pick, right? There were a lot of really smart people who've gotten things right before, who thought Zach Wilson was the guy. I mean, I know Chris Sims was getting dragged for this, but Chris Sims thought Patrick Mahomes was the top quarterback in the draft. No one thought that. Not many people thought that at the time, or at least said it publicly. I know the Saints were interested, and obviously the Chiefs, but that was not being widely discussed. He also was incredibly high on Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen when all of the metrics people were against Josh Allen, and saying that he didn't have the right completion percentage to be an accurate NFL quarterback. And look what we're seeing. I mean, yeah, he does throw some interceptions, I think, recently due to his elbow injury. But largely it's because, you know, he became a pro and he learned how to do that. And they gave him a long leash to do that. And Lamar, of course, you know, there were a lot of really wrong people on that front. And not to make this about Sims, but, you know, he was pretty bullish on Zach Wilson. And there were other analysts who thought that he would be a very successful quarterback given his arm talent. And he showed an ability to scramble. But he didn't have a ton of experience. And frankly, I don't think he had a lot of support from the Jets organization, given the way that they've handled this in the media. And time will tell, right? I think it's more likely than not that he's a bust at this point. However, you can't strip the handling of the Zach Wilson situation from outside of the context of how the Jets have handled the quarterback position in the past. Okay? Look at what Geno is doing in Seattle. The organization has a tendency to let the media and the fan base run the locker room with the quarterback situation, and that's why they haven't had a franchise quarterback, besides maybe Chad Pennington, but since Joe Namath, and why they haven't been to a Super Bowl or won it since Super Bowl III. I believe in my bones that this is a problem with the process and the development within the organization from the top down. And so my critique of the handling of it was less of a defense of Zach Wilson, although I did believe in his upside, and more of a critique of the Jets. And time will tell. But I don't think Mike White's the long-term answer. Maybe it is Derek Carr or Jimmy G. Oh God, Jimmy G's not the long-term answer. Neither of those guys, I think. Oh boy. But at the same time, I mean, if you want to win now, and if that is your process, I think that's a little faulty given, you know, where the Jets have been. They're being a bit impatient, but those guys give you a better chance to win now, I guess. And we will see how that shakes out in the offseason. And I did want to touch on the Vikings and Giants game too, because battle of the pretenders, right? I don't believe the Giants are doing anything this year. And despite the Vikings' magic, I don't think they're winning the Super Bowl. They have more high-end talent than the Giants, and that won out at the end of the day. But I just want to point out that the Vikings' passing defense stinks. Like, I don't know how they're going to manage that when it comes to playoff time. I don't know how they're going to manage that, because Richie James had 90 yards. Isaiah Hodgins, who is more talented than I think I initially gave him credit for, but he had nearly 90 yards as well. Darius Slayton, 80 yards, around 79, 80 yards. And Daniel Jones was just torching them with these very, very subpar weapons. And he played well, threw for over 330 yards. He did have an interception, and Daniel Bellinger had a fumble, and that kind of changed the game irrevocably, honestly, because the Giants looked like they were in control later in the second half. And then, of course, you just have this 61-yard field goal. And the Giants have been, and I don't have the statistic in front of me, but over like the past few years on these 60-yard field goals, they've gone against the Giants like a disproportionate number of times to win games. And so but the point for me, at least as a Giants fan, is that, wow, they went toe-to-toe with the Vikings here. And I don't think the Vikings are the high-end NFC talent of the 49ers or the Eagles or the Cowboys, for that matter. However, the Vikings are an impressive group, especially on offense, and TJ Hawkinson was arriving in this game, right? He was showing that he could be a little bit more consistent catching the football. And of course, Justin Jefferson, I mean, it's honestly disgusting that we don't talk about him for MVP. He should be the MVP. I mean, I know Patrick Mahomes definitely deserves it too. And he could be the MVP almost every year. Joe Burrow, up there. But that defense does help him out more. Justin Jefferson, like, they just go to him as soon as they need a big play. He won that game, or set them up to win that game, with that 61-yard field goal. And did I say Greg Zuerlein? I meant Greg Joseph. I'm sorry. Don't know kickers off the top of my head. But Justin Jefferson got them to that point when it was 3rd and long, and they just threw a screen pass to him, and he got the yardage and then some. And then they were in field goal range, and so it didn't have to go to overtime. But when it really matters, Justin Jefferson is, I mean, that is the player that wins those games for them. And they're not an overly talented team, especially on defense, compared to the other high-end winning teams in the league right now. And Justin Jefferson is doing it for them. I mean, Adam Thielen is not who he once was. I know KJ Osborne is playing really well, and I think, hey, I've said this before, but he's going to be a strong fantasy player next year, when I think he cements that wide receiver 2 role for the Vikings. But when you need a play, you just go to that guy. And he's literally, you cannot defend him. And I know, I'm frustrated that the MVP voting is just quarterback. That's the only position that seems to win at this point. And we're seeing that some of the quarterbacks who've had success along with their teams, a la Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray is another example, getting these big contracts, it's not necessarily benefiting the team. People, and I think the media drives this, put way too much on the quarterback position. And there are other guys on the field. And I don't think that there has been a better case for the MVP voting being unnaturally skewed toward the quarterback position than the dismissal of Justin Jefferson as MVP throughout the year. And I don't think he's going to win it, but I think he should. So those were just some of my thoughts on last week. Let me take a sip of water. See, this is what happens when you're responsible for talking the whole time. I'm getting A little frog in my throat. Well, with that, let's turn to some of the news, because, man, has there been a lot of it. Derek Carr benched for the Raiders. Derek Carr has started 142 games for the Raiders, moved to Vegas with the franchise. He has now cemented the team's leading statistics in passing yards and passing touchdowns. He's only missed 2 regular season games due to injury, and he has 63 wins as the starter for the Raiders, behind only Ken Stabler, who has 69. But he's been benched after not playing well. We should say that. He's thrown 9 interceptions in the last 5 games. But what's so much of a so disappointing about this, I guess, or what I think is going to be the subtext that's missed for a lot of people, is that I think this has a lot less to do with Derek Carr's play and more to do with the Raiders being a cheap organization that doesn't want to pay his $40 million injury guarantee, which becomes fully vested soon. I think it's in the 2023 waiver period, sometime fairly soon in the off season, and the money would become fully guaranteed. And Mark Davis is like, well, I don't have that, so we're gonna unceremoniously bench this guy who has been almost comically corny on the record about how much he loves the Raiders organization, who puts his heart and soul into the team, and who has battled through a lot of dysfunction, including with John Gruden, who is not an easy guy to play for. And they traded for Devontae Adams in the offseason, his BFF, and then signed him. What the hell was the point of that? But it seems like this was a combination of that financial reality, which I think is definitely the driving factor, and also a coach in Josh McDaniels who has shown a willingness to do this kind of thing in the past. I mean, people forget, before Josh McDaniels was a head coach of the Raiders and before he came back to the Patriots, he was signed to be the head coach of the Denver Broncos, and he did this before with Jay Cutler. Jay Cutler, he had a big arm and stuff, but McDaniels was like, I don't want you to lead my organization. This is not good enough. And Jay Cutler has had issues being a leader in the past. Derek Carr has not. So this has more to do with, I think, Carr's play, but of course, really, the reality is just the guaranteed money. So this was, I think, pressure from ownership, but it was made easier by the fact that Carr has not played well recently. And so he's now benched, and they're going to see what they've got with Jarrett Stidham. And also what's insane in this case is that the Raiders are technically alive in the playoff race. I mean, there's a very small chance that happens, but you don't really see this move unless you're completely out of the playoff race mathematically. It's the reason we're not seeing Jordan Love right now, is because the Packers have a very, very small, I guess it's less small now with the Lions loss, now that I think about it. But the Packers have a chance to get into the playoffs, right? And so until you play your starters until you're mathematically eliminated, and it's impossible to get into the playoffs. But that's not the case here, and that's because the owner, Mark Davis, is terrified that Carr will get injured. He'll have to pay all that money. And now they're going to try to find a trade partner, at least on the surface, but no one's going to want to take on that guaranteed money either, because the contract is stacked in a way that it increases yearly, but it's not really guaranteed. So I would imagine that they're just going to cut him, take the smaller dead cap hit before the contract is or before the waiver period, before it's fully vested, and they'll cut him and take the dead cap hit. And move on and try to find somebody in free agency. And one more point on that before we get to who they might target in free agency, but it really is amazing how both the Packers and the Raiders lost that trade, and the Chiefs and the Dolphins both won the Tyreek Hill trade. I mean, there can be trades that are lose-loses, and there can be trades that are win-wins, and that's a prime example of that. So my hunch, and it's just a hunch, aka a guess, like it can't be inside information because I don't have any ability to acquire inside information because I'm just a fan that has takes, and I think my takes are pretty decent, but not an insider quite yet. My guess is that Baker Mayfield will be the starting quarterback of the Raiders next year. He just came back to beat the Raiders in that epic comeback coming off the street or off the plane, whatever, for the Rams. Showing off, some of his high-end ability, because Baker Mayfield's never had a weak arm. That's never been the issue. It's just been like inconsistency and coaching, potentially, attitude, touch, that kind of stuff. But when you have high-end traits like that, you're always going to have an offensive-minded coach who's like, well, I like that. And they might like his moxie as well. You can call it a diva attitude or you can call it moxie. And it really just depends on coaching. But also people forget that the Patriots were interested in Baker Mayfield by all accounts when he was coming out in the draft. Now, it was unrealistic that they were going to be able to trade up to get him. The Browns were not giving up that first overall pick, and they thought that he was their guy, and they were not going to let their guy slip through their hands. I mean, you see, in hindsight, maybe they should have, given the fact that they had this ugly divorce and moved on from him. But if you're like the Bengals, right? I mean, I think the Dolphins were offering a ton of their first-round picks so they could get to Burrow. The Bengals made the right choice. I mean, if you think you have the franchise at your fingertips, a guy like Joe Burrow, you're not going to trade that pick. And the Browns miscalculated. What else is new? But that's beside the point. I mean, Josh McDaniels was with the Patriots when they were interested in Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield is going to be the hottest commodity in free agency coming up in the 2023 season for the quarterback position. Jimmy G will also be there. Tom Brady is also going to be a free agent. Am I fully convinced that he's actually going to come back to football? No. There are a lot of people that think that's the case. There are rumors that he's going to go to New Orleans with Sean Payton. I don't know why the hell he would want to do that. The guy looks absolutely miserable, but maybe he lost some money with that FTX stuff. Maybe he, has nothing left to lose now that he lost his wife due to coming back to play. I don't really know. But besides Tom Brady, who will be the hottest name, even if his playing at this point has been pretty poor, Baker Mayfield will be the hottest player, I think, commodity in free agency for the quarterback position. I mean, there's a chance Lamar Jackson hits free agency, but they're going to franchise tag him. So they might tag and trade him. That could be something interesting. But I do think Baker Mayfield, they can get him for a decent deal in Las Vegas. That's my guess. He's younger, maybe a bit more of a risk taker, and perhaps McDaniels thinks that he can mold Baker Mayfield into the ideal quarterback for his system. Now, for the Derek Carr side, where do I think Derek Carr is going to go in the offseason? Man, I mean, Baker Mayfield is going to be a hot commodity for free agency, but probably the second hottest commodity, just because he's a little bit older, is going to be Derek Carr. And everyone's saying the New York Jets. I think that makes a lot of sense where he could end up going, because look, the Raiders are not going to be able to trade him and get an asset for him with that injury guarantee coming up. So I'm almost positive that they will end up cutting him and then he will get to pick his next team, which he's earned the right to do. He's been a loyal soldier for the Raiders organization, and he should be able to pick his next destination. Although you can kind of technically do that in a trade situation, it's just it's a little bit more complicated. But again, I think it's moot because they're not going to want to. No team's going to want to take on that contract. So the Jets, I think, I mean, look, it's self-explanatory. They'll also probably be in the market for Jimmy G, but I think they should pursue Carr instead. I think the upside with Carr is better. And Jimmy G, we're seeing what's happening in San Francisco. Kyle Shanahan can turn a potted plant into a starting quarterback. How much do we know that it is Jimmy G who has been successful, and how much is it the system? I mean, we're also seeing that Brock Purdy has changed the way the offense looks. There's way less hospital balls over the middle, which is what Jimmy G loves to throw, now that Purdy's in the offense, and that would scare me if I was a team trying to give him a contract. So the Jets, I think, are the number one trade destination possibility for Derek Carr. Number 2, the Washington Commanders. Derek Carr's former MAGA January 6er apologist former head coach Jack Del Rio is the defensive coordinator there. Maybe he's speaking to Ron Rivera, saying, I really like this guy. That there's a real possibility there. We'll see how Carson Wentz plays in the final part of the season, but it's just time to kind of abandon the Carson Wentz experiment, I think, now that he's on his 3rd team and the problems still seem to be the same. He could also end up with the Saints, Derek Carr, but I know that they've done cap magic every offseason. I don't know how they're going to be able to work it out this year. And their whole team is getting really old, and they should be rebuilding. They should be in the running for the 1st overall pick, in my opinion, if Sean Payton doesn't get back in 2024. Maybe they'll get Caleb Williams. I mean, that would be a sight to see, right? That would be incredible. God, I wish there was a way the Giants could get him. Probably not. But I don't know why, if Derek Carr has options, he would go to the Saints, given the fact that they're a rebuilding team. Here's my dark horse candidate. The Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins don't need much at quarterback. And right now we're seeing their 1st-round pick, Tua. He is struggling to stay on the field. He has the frame that would concern me if I were a Dolphins executive or member of the organization. It's shown that he can get injured pretty easily, let alone his concussion history, which is deeply, deeply concerning from a personal level. And then if you're looking at the cold-hearted investment level, I don't understand how you could feel good about investing in him long-term, given that. And then also, in my opinion, the fact that his play has been poor even before the recent concussion, the fact that there are a lot of people who could have success in that offense, given the way that guys are open in space, the 2 incredible receivers that offense has, and the way that defense is starting to play on that side of the ball, the Dolphins are stacked at every level. And so if he hears through back channels that maybe they'll bring him in and Tua is a bit on the outs, or they are not going to pick up that 5th-year option and they can keep him on the roster for cheap as a backup to Derek Carr, that would be my number 1 destination if I were Carr. I guess there's an off chance that the Titans would be interested, but my sense is that Vrabel likes Ryan Tannehill. So I don't really see that being the case. Now, speaking of Tua, let's talk about that horrific concussion that he got in the Packers game. And the Dolphins were controlling that game for a long period of time. But then I believe it was in the second quarter, I saw on Twitter actually that some Dolphins fan account put a video up of Tua's head hitting the turf. And they were putting it up as an explanation for the 3 kind of inexplicable interceptions that Tua threw after that. And at the time I was like, okay, you know, but they put him back in the game, right? Maybe this is just like a Dolphins fan who is trying to make excuses for Tua. And now I'm not a doctor, but looking at it back as opposed to in real time, it's obvious that he was affected. And Mike McDaniel has essentially confirmed as much, saying that they went back and watched the tape, and that's when they decided, okay, let's get him in the concussion protocol. Because it was that the decisions did not make sense to that degree. And I don't understand how he was holding a conversation and people didn't know. Like, the Dolphins scored 0 points after Tua's head got hit. He then threw 3 interceptions in the fourth quarter, as I discussed. And from a winning perspective, right, again, looking at it completely cold-heartedly, I don't think Mike McDaniel is as guilty as some might think in this situation, because he's worried about like play calling, and if he thought Tua was impaired, I'd imagine that he would want Teddy Bridgewater in the game. This is a huge problem for the Dolphins organization and the NFL in general. And people are going to try to put this on the player like, oh, his competitiveness is so out of this world. He fooled us. He fooled the spotters. He fooled the Dolphins medical staff. No, the onus is on the business to protect their employees, especially if you're the cheap-ass Dolphins. Get some actual doctors in there. This has been a national storyline for the entire year. I mean, it's on you guys to protect this guy. And his incentives are, yes, to go out there and play. Like, he wants to prove that he's the franchise quarterback. He wants to cement himself as the franchise. And his position is inherently precarious because there are a lot of questions about his play and if he's able to get it done at this level. And it's also precarious for most quarterbacks in the NFL. They feel like they could get replaced at any moment because they can, because the stakes are that high for that position. So, of course, he's going to try to play. That's not the point. The point is that the spotters did not do their jobs. And the point is that the Dolphins medical staff did not do their jobs for like the 3rd time this year. So, yes, clearly the player has a tendency more than others to have this kind of injury. That means that the Dolphins medical staff should be more sensitive to it. It is really concerning to see how unable Tua is to protect himself. If I were his family member, I don't know if I would want him playing football ever again. I don't understand how this falls through the cracks. From the Dolphins' perspective, on protecting a guy who came into your organization, and from the NFL, who has these spotters who seem to have missed a lot of things this year. When it comes to Tua, there was also the concussion to Devontae Parker and on the Patriots that another Patriots player had to alert them to. Like, this is supposed to be your guys' job. And it seems like they've just gotten loosey-goosey with it ever since Congress and the Concussion Tell the Truth movie with Will Smith. Like, they feel like the white-hot spotlight is off of them to a degree. But it shone right back on them in that Bengals-Dolphins game. And they still have not improved their process because this happened again to Tua. And you watch back that video that was posted on social media, and you can see, yes, his head did hit the turf. So I have no idea what the hell the Dolphins are thinking, and they need to get it together to protect their player, because I'm concerned for Tua as a human being and his long-term ramifications of this. I also want to highlight this major story lots coming towards the end of the year, these kinds of stories, but Nathaniel Hackett has been fired. And we all knew this was going to happen. I mean, he was a dead man walking, but it seemed like the Broncos wanted to keep him around until the end of the season for God knows what reason. But they basically were forced into firing him after that insanely pathetic loss to the Rams, which wasn't just a bad loss to a bad team. It was also a moment where you saw multiple fights break out because people just the Broncos players just essentially had it. They were through with this shit. They were through with everything about this year, and I don't blame them. I mean, don't fight anybody. That's not right. But you could see the frustration, and he'd already lost the locker room by that point. That's how it read to me watching the game. And it's amazing to me that George Paton has survived this debacle after giving Russell Wilson that extension, after seeing how he apparently looked in training camp and choosing to give him the extension ahead of the season before seeing him play. Now they're stuck with him for the foreseeable future. I think if you were to give them some sort of truth serum, they would say we'd rather cut him than keep him on the roster, but they literally cannot, given the dead cap hits that would be so insurmountable. You know, I would, if I were this new ownership group and I had the money that the Walmart people had, he'd be gone in a second. But he's, I guess, going to be involved in the process of helping pick the next head coach, but less involved. It's going to be the new ownership group, the CEO Penner. However, it's bad process to keep a dead man walking GM around and get a new head coach because, I mean, we're seeing it with the Giants when you hire, and I mean, the Vikings too, for example, like they hired their GM and their head coach at the same time. The Giants, head coach, GM, same time. They are able to kind of interview together, share their visions, have a cohesive plan for the way the team is going to be run, and they are tied together. So there's no politicking where you're undercutting somebody to save yourself and vice versa, and or the GM does it to the head coach does it to the GM, and vice versa. Although usually the GM wins because the GM hangs out with the owner a lot more and the coach is with the players. But I digress. The interim head coach for the Broncos is now the guy that they hired to help Hackett with game management. Some of the highlights of this season, the Broncos are 0-3 in overtime. They completely mismanaged the clock in week 1 in that insane way where they burn 30 seconds before trying to kick a over 60-yard field goal for no reason when they could have gone for it, I think on like 4th and 4. Russell Wilson had those horrible turnovers versus the Colts. He had a meltdown against the Rams. And they also, like, they lost in overtime against the Chargers as well. It's just been insane. And I don't know why anyone would want to take this job except if you throw a pile of money at the guy, and if the guy is someone like Jim Harbaugh, who clearly wants to get back into the NFL. And that's got to be the front runner for the person they're going to hire. Because they've been saying that they want a CEO of the football operation, somebody who's going to be a veteran and bring the team together and knows how to win in the NFL. And Jim Harbaugh, despite my many misgivings with him as a human being, has won in the NFL. And he's a veteran as opposed to the Nathaniel Hackett first-time head coach deal that did not work out. So they're going to want to go with someone a bit more seasoned who can be an adult in that locker room. Like, I think that is going to be the way that this organization goes to try to salvage this Russell Wilson situation, because they literally cannot change anything about it because the contract is so favored towards Russell Wilson. They can't get out of it. And time will tell. I mean, what they really need is to play like they did in Seattle. They need the defense to be dominant, and then they need the offense to be simple so Russell Wilson doesn't have to make reads. I mean, that's the situation that we're at with their $250 million quarterback. It's a disaster. I've never seen anything like it in the NFL. And I'm hopeful, as I said earlier in the show, that this kind of contract gives owners pause about extending quarterbacks because of team success. We all thought Russell Wilson was elite. I did. But now we're seeing maybe this was the team that brought him to that situation. The quarterback contracts, I think they need to come down to earth so the rest of the pie is able to be distributed among the other players. And between Deshaun Watson and whatever the hell the Browns did and what the Broncos bungled here with Russell Wilson, perhaps that gives the rest of the league pause before these extensions kind of take up so much cap for the team that there isn't enough for the rest of the guys, because that is, I think, more of a winning formula than certainly what's happening in Denver. With that said, let's get to our locks for week 17.
ESVN Stone Cold Lock of the Century all week.
All right. These are our picks against the spread for week 17 in the NFL season. Now, last week, it was another banner week, unfortunately, for Bradley. He texted me, "Go Texans," in all caps on Christmas, and he was right about that. Went 3-0 against the spread. The Jaguars plus 2.5 pick. He's once again reverse mushed himself. Picked against the Jets again, and he was right. Bengals -3. I almost went with that instead of the Lions -2.5, which I definitely should have, given how the Panthers just controlled that game from start to finish, honestly. He got that, as well as Texans +3, who, Malik Willis is just not ready to start in the NFL. I pushed on the Eagles +6, which was really frustrating because the Eagles let that game slip away from them. And the 49ers -7 was the easiest cover. And there was no doubt in my mind that they were going to win that game comfortably throughout the entirety of the day, or when I was watching that game. So I went 1-1-1. And Bradley went 3-0. So now we are he is unfortunately pulling away a little bit. But I feel really confident about my picks this week. I say that every week. But hopefully this week, I'm back in the plus column as opposed to just 1-1-1. I mean, I'm 23-23-2. I could not be more mediocre right now with my picks. I need this to turn around. And we're going to do this in the playoffs, so we still have some more runway. But damn, do I want to beat this guy, Bradley. And he, by the way, sent me his picks for this week as well, and a little bit of explanation, so I'll read that to you once we get there. But here are our picks for week 17 in the NFL. We both decided that we were going to go with the Jaguars. We decided this stuff independently. He emailed me his. I'd already had mine. The Jaguars at Houston -4. I was surprised to see this spread. I think it's a little bit artificially inflated because of the performance last week against the Titans. But the Titans are sliding. They're just in free fall at this point. And so I don't think you can glean too much from that. And the Jaguars are the opposite. The Jaguars have the inside track at this point because they have the same record as the Titans in the AFC South, and they have the tiebreaker, if I'm remembering correctly. I should check that actually. But they play again. Yes, they do. They won on December 11th, and they play again on the 8th. Although who knows if that'll matter. Although there are 2 weeks left. So, oh my God, my math skills are terrible. But at the same time, like, the Jaguars are not going to mess around, in my opinion. with the Texans when they have the opportunity to win the division. And Bradley agrees. Here he says, I think the covering underdog magic loses its luster this week against Jacksonville. Trevor Lawrence has been playing some of his best football, and I think Doug Peterson will happily look for ways to stifle and baffle a young and inexperienced Texans defense. Yeah, the Texans are. I just think they got their second win of the year, and that's it for them. And the Jaguars have a ton of more motivation to actually win this game. So I think they'll win, and they will win comfortably. And then there'll be another instance of Trevor Lawrence showing how he is a budding star in the NFL. And I think that they're of the two terrible Southern divisions, the AFC and NFC South. I am way more afraid of the Jaguars in the playoffs if I were an AFC team, the wild I'd be way more afraid of the Jaguars than either the Panthers or the Bucks in the NFC, is all I'll say. Whoever ends up winning that division. So my second pick here, though, is I'm going back to Philly. I believe in the Eagles. I believe in the Eagles even without Jalen Hurts. And this line would be bigger if Jalen Hurts were playing. I know, but the Eagles, like, they should have won or covered that game against the Cowboys. They had some lapses and their defense just played terribly. But now the Eagles will be at home. I think the defense is going to want to turn things around. And this is the first round pick bowl. The Eagles have the Saints first rounder inexplicably because the Saints made a decision to win now this year. It was one of the dumbest trades, and I said it at the time. It looked dumb on the surface, and it was dumb. And so the Eagles will be motivated to get that pick a little bit higher in the draft. I mean, the Saints will also be motivated to kind of spoil, but I just felt the Saints' win in Cleveland was very fluky last week. Gardner Minshew showed that he can still run that offense. He threw for over 350 yards against the Cowboys. Their secondary is banged up, but so is the secondary for the Saints. Marshawn Lattimore at this point, I believe, is questionable. And I know that they're still mathematically alive in that terrible NFC South, but I just... Oh, wait, okay. Oh, well, he was inactive last time, so he could be active potentially, Lattimore. But that doesn't really change my opinion that much about the Eagles. I think Gardner Minshew will want to get a win in one of his Eagles starts. I think they'll win by a significant margin. And the Eagles are playing for that first round bye, which they really need in order to make sure that Jalen Hurts gets healthy for a playoff push. This is the best team in the NFL. Talent-wise. I mean, I think the 49ers are up there. I think the Bengals, from a whole team perspective, are up there as well. But I don't think the best team in the NFL should be a 5.5 point favorite. I think that's too small against a very poor Saints team that is old and at this point in the year might be a bit tired. My one fear is that the Eagles are really starting to get banged up outside of Jalen Hurts. Lane Johnson injured, avoiding surgery so he can play in the playoffs. I mean, like, that's a bit of a dicey proposition. Miles Sanders is hurt, I know. CJ Gardner-Johnson is still out, and Avonte Maddox is out indefinitely, but it's like the Saints don't have the passing offense really to take advantage. So I'm not that worried about it. So that's what I'm going with. Eagles minus 5.5. Now, Bradley took the bait on this line, and I almost did as well, but it was a little bit too good to be true, it felt like. The Vikings +3 at the Packers. Here's what Bradley had to say about his pick. This isn't a primetime game, so I'm not as worried as I might have been to take Kirk Cousins in Lambeau, but this is still the team of destiny who have found improbable ways to win every single week, and I'm sticking with it until I'm ultimately burned by a missed field goal or muff punt or something blowing the cover. I am shocked by this line. The Vikings are not favored in this game, given how the Packers have played, and the Packers should not have won that game against the Dolphins. I mean, Tua, given his head injury kind of like gave the game away with some of those. Not his fault, of course. The Dolphins' fault, the NFL's fault. But those interceptions essentially gifted the game to the Packers. Like the Dolphins were controlling the game in the first half. So I think that's a good bet by Bradley. I think the Vikings will win that game because they still have a lot to play for. They are trying to get that second seed, and the 49ers are hot on their tail. Speaking of the 49ers, that's my last pick for the week. The 49ers minus 9.5 versus the reeling and Derek Carr-less Las Vegas Raiders. The run game for the 49ers has just been in its typical late season groove. Kyle Shanahan is my vote for coach of the year at this point, given how he's handled the Brock Purdy situation in particular. And speaking of that guy, he's been efficient. He's been effective. He has been throwing outside the numbers and making some more explosive plays, doing some nice, good stuff with his feet, making smart decisions. And now the run game's gotten going. And that also means Kittle is going off because, he'll be in as a blocker and they'll fake the run and he gets these big catches. And it's just unstoppable when they're in that mode. And I think that the Raiders are going to be deflated with Derek Carr leaving the team. I can't imagine they're feeling good about what they have to play for the rest of the year. And I don't really believe in Jarrett Stidham. I think the 49ers are rolling. And they're a scary team. So 49ers minus 9.5 for my final pick. And Bradley's final pick, whoo, baby. He's going for the Bengals. Now, here's what he has to say. I can't quit the Bengals. This is a home game. Burrow and this offense have been hitting their stride despite the injuries in the receiving core. The defense is up for any challenge, and the Bills' O-line isn't top tier to begin with. So there could be some real disruptions if the Bills dare run the ball outside of some Allen scrambles and design runs. And if they can blanket the Bills receivers like they were able to do against Mahomes and the Chiefs, it'll be a difficult day for Josh Allen at the office. He's amazing, but he's at points the entire Bills offense, and that's tough to sustain. Yes, and I think the loss of Von Miller has really, really hurt the Bills. I think that they don't have enough superstars on defense to sustain the way that they were playing early in the year. I'm quite concerned about their Super Bowl prospects at this point, especially because it's just so much on Josh Allen. The Bengals are a more complete team. I think this game can go either way. I'd be scared to take it, but I do think the Bengals are the better team in this situation. So, with that said, guys, that is our ESVN regular episode combined with OT. Special episode solo by me. Thanks so much for listening and watching, and subscribe. YouTube.com/ESVN show. Put on push notifications like this episode. Help with the engagement, all that good stuff. Another eventful week in the NFL, and we're hitting the playoffs soon. Once the Super Bowl's over, we're getting into a groove with like the NBA and the NHL. Lots of good stuff coming around. Appreciate you all. We will see you on the Thursday. Let me look at the calendar so I can give you guys a firm date. We will see you when I get back from vacation on Thursday, the 12th of January. So no episode next week. Back with a ESVN OT regular episode combo for that Thursday, and then we're back on our regular schedule going forward. So we will see you then. Bye bye.